Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to the 21st Century Scholars Summer Learning Institute. This is our last and final program for the Summer Learning Institute this year. We've had a really great 5 weeks sharing with you some of our tips, tricks, and resources to help you make that transition from high school to college just a little bit easier. I'm Julia Jennings. I'm the Director of Community and School Partnerships. And we've been really excited to partner with the IU Bloomington 21st Century Scholars Program and the Commission for Higher Education here in Indiana to bring this program to you. So it is my honor to welcome again our guests from the Writing Tutorial Services, Jennifer Lopatin and Matthew Pollock, who are going to share with you today about college writing assignments, revisions, making the most of writing tutorials, and the most of your professor's office hours. So with that, I will turn it over to Jennifer and Matthew.
Hello, everyone. I'm going to here. All right. So last week, we got the chance to talk about some of the early stages of writing, and this week we find ourselves here again. And I'm glad you guys were able to make it out. And those of you who are watching this digitally recorded later, welcome. I'm Matthew, and this is Jennifer, and I guess we'll start out by giving a brief sort of introduction of ourselves. Jennifer, you want to go first?
Sure. So I'm Jennifer. I am a graduate student here at IU in English, so a grad tutor working at WITS, as we call Writing Tutorial Services affectionately. I study English. I teach composition classes mostly, and I've been working at WITS for several years. I don't know, many, whatever, 5, something like that. I came up with a new version of the icebreaker from last week. So favorite thing about moving to college writing is that I have gotten to focus more on ideas and topics that I care about more. And I mean, so there are still obviously restrictions, but in high school, I mean, there's a very set curriculum. And so then going to college, even with those within the gen ed requirements, there has been opportunity to figure out classes that seem like they're interesting or that I want to learn more about, and getting to explore my own ideas within those topics. The biggest challenge then has been, just learning to write in different fields, different conventions, and how to very clearly walk the reader through my own thought process when they don't have access to the connections I've made in my brain. Matthew.
Yes, me. So I'm Matthew. I am a PhD student in Spanish linguistics and general linguistics. I've been working at WITS for 4 years now. And essentially, I'm a graduate peer tutor, so I work with undergrads and grads at WITS. And I do a lot of writing myself, both within my sort of PhD program and beyond.
Programs.
What's that? Yes, well,
Programs.
Programs. My favorite thing about moving to college writing, well, I guess other things than what I mentioned last week, I do like the fact that, especially early on, there's just a lot of variety in college writing. Because, you have your English classes, you also have your history classes, you'll have science classes, you'll get the chance to kind of experience a lot of different types of writing, and you get the chance to then figure out what it is that you like, what it is that interests you, what it is that you can do well, and then you get to go forward from there. And I think that's also kind of, on the flip side, a bit of a challenge, because you are trying, or expected after a couple of semesters, to know some of the different norms in all of these different fields. And so trying to juggle everything, you have to remember that in the sciences, well, maybe you're using APA to cite, and in English, you're using MLA, or you have to remember, what is the sort of length. For me, I work with different languages. So, what are the norms in Spanish writing versus English writing? So it's a lot of things to keep track of, especially early on, but you kind of pick that up over time. And I think it would be good, even though we've heard from you last week, to get to that same sort of introduction from the two of you, if you don't mind.
Okay, I'll go first.
All right.
My name is Jeba.
Welcome back.
Hi. Do I do the? What am I supposed to do with what do we do? Is that
So you can essentially just do major and then favorite thing about writing and biggest challenge, just in general. It doesn't necessarily have to be college writing yet.
okay? My major is exercise science. My favorite thing about writing is just writing about like a really good book or a good movie that I've like read or seen.
Mm-hmm.
And then the hardest thing is when we have to do like specific 5-page essays, I guess.
Yeah. Yeah, long essays, especially, I mean, I think they get easier as you start to do them, but just every new sort of page milestone, I think, is hard to write your first 3-page essay, then 5-page essay, then 8-page essay. Each one is a sort of new beast, it feels like, to try and tackle.
Learning process.
Hello again.
Hi, Miguel. Oh, sorry, spoilers.
Yeah. My name is Miguel, and my intended major is human biology. And my favorite part about writing is just sort of like it's really a skill, but it's also like something that like almost, I don't know, it's like you don't need to learn or to know too much to like be able to improve.
Yeah.
And I guess like the biggest challenge or what I like least about writing is like, I don't know, just really getting stuck and like, or maybe like I come up with a bunch of ideas for the paper that like I have in mind and then it doesn't meet the requirements. Like I fall short
Mm-hmm.
or something like that. That kind of stinks.
Yeah, it totally does.
Yeah, that can be hard. I mean, word counts are difficult too. I know some students have trouble, getting right up to the edge of that word count. Some people always want to go over. Some people just, can't find those last couple of words. So how to get there to that happy middle can be really difficult sometimes.
Yeah. I will say, usually instructors have a standard deviation
Right.
on the other side of the word count, unless they say otherwise. Like we looked at that assignment sheet last week that was like, do not exceed. Right. And like at that point, right, you're not going to go over the 700 words or whatever it is. But
right.
Yeah, it can really, stink to get stuck or to have some really cool ideas, but then they don't fit the prompt.
Right.
So we'll talk about some of that today. But thank you both for sharing.
So speaking of that, so for today, essentially we're going to be getting into the planning aspect and what comes after that, including revisions and how to, get those citations looking good. And at the very end, we'll talk a little bit about office hours and wits and what both of those situations can offer. But essentially we'll go for it.
We can probably, weave in office hours and wits throughout, but we'll
that is true.
set aside some time.
Yes. And as with last time, if you have any specific questions at any point, you can use the chat, you can use the poll, which we'll show you in a little bit, or you can use, your voice or any other means, smoke signals, whatever you'd like to let us know.
You can like doodle it and put the doodle in front of your camera. Like it's, whatever works.
Yes. As I said, whatever makes the most sense for you and getting it to us. So yeah,
smoke signals might be hard with the rain.
Yeah.
Yeah, at least we don't have to go anywhere in this rain, but we're still going to get our feet wet. Hey. All right, cool. You're welcome. Okay.
Thanks. That was great.
You're welcome. Yep. All right. So.
Yeah. So we're going to talk about how to, draft. What does that mean? Once we've gotten everything from last week, we've got the thesis, we've got some like general ideas about where we're going. We have the prompt read and we know kind of what's wanted from that assignment sheet. So how do we get things on the page? We talked a little bit about an outline, which is a good first step, but what goes next? Paragraph structure. So as you're drafting, what is the sort of goal for your paragraph, and what's essentially pulling that thesis throughout the rest of your essay in a useful way. Balancing evidence and analysis. How do you find the right sort of evidence? How do you compare various sorts of evidence? How do you make sure that your evidence is doing something that helps your argument? General conclusion writing. I mean, that can be a little bit difficult because you don't want to just repeat everything from the intro, but you still want to get that idea of, so what we talked about last time. Why is this important? What is this showing us? Revising. So getting from a rough draft to a polished draft. And then finally, citations and formatting, what does MLA, what does APA require? Where do you look for that? How do you finish everything up? Other things to add?
I mean, we're pulling forward. It's because writing's a process, and it's not
Right.
a straightforward process. You're always going to double back on things. So, like for revision, it's a really important step, but that means that, like we talked about, giving yourself enough time is going to be really important. Conclusions, as we'll talk about, can be instructor specific. So we'll essentially give general outlines. With all of this, because we're getting more into more specific examples, it's going to depend. And so we're essentially going to be giving general patterns, and we'll dive in with the sample papers that we briefly looked at last week. Right. But as always, it's going to be determined by your class, your instructor, the specific instructions that you get. So these are not like universal truths, because there are so few of those, especially in writing. But these are general patterns.
I mean, I've seen assignment sheets before that say your conclusion should be 2 sentences. One sentence states X, the other sentence states Y, and then close. And then others, professors are just like, write what makes sense to you. So this is a good suggestion, but not the end all be all.
Right.
All right. Here we are with the poll. I believe Jennifer will put the link in the. Okay.
Sorry, let me grab that real fast.
No problem. So just like with last time, clearly if you are watching this asynchronously, we're sorry, but this is not going to be useful for you. But for Java and Miguel and Lisa too, if anybody has questions or comments they want to make, and you want it to be more anonymous than in the Zoom chat, yeah, there you go. Then you are free to put them in the poll. And we will double back throughout as well as at the very end for any questions you might have.
These are, as last time, completely anonymous. You can submit more than one. This will be active throughout. So if you think of one like in the middle of the presentation, but you don't want to put it in the chat, this is another area. Is it working? Yes.
It does seem to be in the chat. Thumb up for success.
Okay,
right.
Yes, it's working.
Perfect. We'll move forward then. All right, so we're going to double back over a little bit of the broad general ground from last time, just because this is important to remember, that we have this sort of like U loop, that you start out being unaware of what you don't know about writing, becoming aware of it, maybe at this point, maybe over the next couple of months or semesters, maybe you already kind of know that there's a lot of stuff you're not really aware of, and then taking that next step to the bottom right, where you are learning these skills and you're able to sort of call on them, but it takes effort. And then finally moving up into that light blue space at the top right, where you are not just aware of them, but you're able to call on them. So okay, when I'm writing a thesis, this is the sort of thing I should put together. Or when I'm writing a 5-page essay, all right, typically I want to have this much time dedicated to this thing, this much time dedicated to this thing, and here's how I should write a conclusion for it. So all of those things, I mean, and I don't think that you can treat this as a single process, that once you reach the blue, you're good to go. You know everything about writing.
Done. Yeah, no.
But rather, I think every separate skill about writing sort of undergoes this process. You might be really great at writing a thesis and still have, significant struggles with trying to get the evidence to interact with that thesis. And as we say here, nobody's born a good writer. You're not going to have somebody who just, steps out onto the field in college and is at a blue without any sort of learning or training.
And also, I mean, it can be worth thinking about like what it means to be a good writer. And 9 times out of 10, that is clearly communicating your thoughts, as opposed to like having the fanciest language or like the most perfect commas. Because those things can be nice, but at the end of the day, it's your ideas and how you back them up that are what matter. So.
And this is something that we'll also see a little bit as we look at the Google Doc, that essentially you can write really fancily because it seems like everybody else is writing with really big words, but that's not necessarily the most effective way to convey information. So to use all of your words that are more than 6 syllables, sure, that's good to have some of those terms in there, but you don't necessarily need to use the more complex route when the simple route gets the information across just as well.
Unless it's like the literal only term, because I know in the sciences especially, like there's no other way to say the technical name for the kneecap or whatever.
well,
You can
could
tell
call
I'm
it
not in the sciences.
the kneecap, but you know,
No,
yeah,
it's
there are
like the patella or whatever, right? I
Mhm.
don't know. You guys know. Give Miguel know. I don't.
But I mean, yeah. So I mean, there are definitely going to be terms, and there could be theoretical terms. There could be other terms
Right.
that people just always use.
Yeah.
But you don't have to make it any more complex than it needs to be.
Yeah.
All right.
We don't need to be fancy for the sake of fanciness.
No, that serves no good purpose.
Mm.
And then this is also something we talked about last time a bit, but just to kind of quickly brush back through it, the idea that there is going to be a bit of a divide between what you experienced in high school and what a lot of your classes in college are asking for. And that's not always true. Maybe you had some high school classes that were doing other things. Maybe some college classes are more introductory and are trying to do some of everything. But in general, that high school essay is it fits this format of 5 paragraphs. It does this thing and it does it every single time. Whereas in college, I think the big push is to try to show you that there are different ways to write essays, that there are different ways to connect to evidence, and you can develop further past that and still write a very interesting, well-developed argument that doesn't necessarily follow an easy format.
Yeah, so like we said last week, it's not that the 5-paragraph format is like bad, and sometimes it can be the one that makes the most sense. It's just that we don't want to be confined by it.
Right. All right, so here's where we kind of get into the drafting session for today. So as you can see, we've got this hourglass here that kind of lays out the introduction and conclusion, at least. We see that body of the essay is just kind of there in the middle, and we'll get into that when we talk about paragraphs. But this idea from the introduction is that you're taking this essay from the general sort of topic, not the beginning of time and space, but maybe the coronavirus in America in March of 2020. You're moving into more specifics, maybe about the way that testing looked, or the way that people, or the number of people that were getting sick, since this is all kind of reflected in one of our Google Doc essays that you guys saw last week. And then finally, that thesis is maybe making a claim about what the problem was, or what a solution was, or how this information can be used in some way. You then have the essay that is doing all of that stuff. And then that conclusion paragraph is trying to work its way back outwards. So the hourglass is kind of showing you that it gets really tight and focused, and then it works its way out. Here's a recap of what we looked through. So here are the couple of different ideas that are important. And then the so what, how do we take all of this information and do something still confined with it, but useful? You don't necessarily need to say, and because of this argument, we shall save the human race from pandemics for all time. But maybe you'll show people how data collection can change, or how we can think about these things differently.
Yeah, so this might be familiar from writing classes, it might not. Sometimes the visualization is with umbrellas to kind of give that sense of general to specific, of like, we're moving from the umbrella to the handle and back out. Sometimes it's triangles, but yeah, the idea is we're moving from general to specific back out to general, and it goes back to that idea of not throwing your reader a surprise party that we talked about last week. That was not from me, that was from one of my writing teachers. And this also is then essentially the format per paragraph as well. So essentially we're like, all right, here's where we're going. And then we provide the evidence, and that's the specific part. And then we're like, all right, in case you got distracted by a butterfly, instead of listening to my super cool ideas, here's the takeaway.
Mm-hmm. And I do like this central bullet, this idea of, since drafting can be hard, and since you don't want to just sit down and come out with everything at once necessarily, you can stop and say, all right, this is not really in order, but I've got my thesis together. What is a sort of general connecting idea? Or I've got my thesis together, I know what I'm going to argue in the body. How do I want to sort of recap all of this in a way that's not just repeating my thesis?
Yeah. I will say also, some people find it easier to start with the thesis and move on from there. Others find it more useful to work their way through the body paragraphs and figure out their argument from there and go back and revise, or some combination thereof. Yeah, all types work. I'm personally thesis driven. Like I need to know where I'm going to draft. But I mean, I know lots of people who work with the evidence first and build the argument from there. With that, the revision aspect is going to be key, because otherwise it is very clear that you're kind of working through the argument as you're going.
Yeah, I think that's important to mention, is that we have these sort of steps, and if you have your thesis first, you have all of the sort of ideas, and you can build your paragraphs off of that. But if you're building your paragraphs first, maybe they don't connect up perfectly, and you need to figure out, how are these transitioning together? How are these arguing the same thing? maybe I need to reword things.
But conversely, if you come up with a thesis first, then maybe you're limiting your ideas, right? So I mean, there are pros and cons to both sides, or both approaches.
Yeah. All right. So we talked about sort of developing a thesis last time. So why are we talking about it again? And I think that this is an important moment to sort of talk about the two ideas of developing. So last time we were really creating a thesis. We were putting together the words and ideas. And this time we're going to be doing something closer to developing, where we're actually connecting all together. As you see in this image on the left, you've got like this central point maybe is your thesis, and all of these different ideas that you're going to be bringing in are very unconnected. So developing it is developing the connective tissue, the yarn, so to speak, in this image.
We're not saying your essay is a conspiracy theory that you're arguing. We're just saying you're bringing together a lot of seemingly disparate ideas to support your argument.
Nobody has yet been able to disprove that your essay is a conspiracy theory. And so your thesis, it kind of has various different positions where it will go, because if your thesis is just your claim, your argument, all these terms we talked about last week, you want that to show up throughout. Otherwise, a reader might be like, well, this whole paragraph seems to be unrelated to what you're arguing. So you've got this thesis in your intro, and you have it developed in your conclusion, but then you want to connect it up in some way to those body paragraphs so that throughout you're like, okay, this is all supporting this larger claim.
So yeah, so just to recap, like thesis statement, it can be kind of a big scary term because it's, Greek or whatever. It's basically, it's your argument. It's the main point that you want to be getting across. Again, this is going to also vary across disciplines, or even within some classes. In 131, we talk about the evolving thesis versus like the upfront thesis, essentially. So it's going to depend, but at the end of the day, again, we're going to have this through line, this connective tissue that is tying everything together and helping you make your point.
Exactly. Cool.
Also, oh, sorry.
Oh, no, go for it first.
Since we're going to be talking about revision, I'm just going to be plugging it to no end. Oftentimes, if you're stuck with revision, like you've got your first draft and you're like, I don't really know what I'm arguing, I don't really know how to structure this, let's go with like 8 times out of 10. Don't quote me on that. That is not a statistically like sound number. We're just ballparking it. Start with your conclusion, because there are so many times I've seen that in drafts that the conclusion paragraph can essentially become the intro paragraph of the next draft, and then we just build it from there. Like it's a beautiful encapsulation of the argument. It's got all of the pieces that are coming together, but it's not something that I had seen previewed in that intro paragraph. So we want to be clear about it up front, but if you're on your first draft and you're like, I don't even know what I'm saying, first place to look is your conclusion, see what you're talking about there.
Because usually that's the last thing you're getting to on that first draft. So that's where you're most familiar with your argument.
Yeah, it's where all the ideas have coalesced and you have this, conspiracy yarn diagram.
And so I was going to say, since we kind of have front loaded a lot of material and then we're going to get to that draft, I do want to take a pause just to see if Miguel or Java, either of you have comments, questions, or thoughts at this point.
No, not really.
Okay.
All everywhere is. Sorry. Dave, was that a no? I talked over you by accident.
Yeah, I was a no.
Okay. All right. Yeah. And so our goal is to kind of get through all these different ideas, and then we're going to look at those drafts to see how do we see all of these things coming together or not coming together in this finished sort of rough draft product. All right. Yeah. So drafting can be a difficult process. I mean, just getting yourself to sit down is one step. Pulling up the word processor is the next step. And then being able to get words on the page is yet another step. It's just, there's so many steps before you even have something written down. And I think one of the nice things with classes like 131 or these other composition classes is they try and break it down into baby steps at the start. So you're doing, here's a thesis, here's this idea, here's this argument, here's this little piece, and then you're able to draw it all together. So when you sit down for your final writing, you've got a lot of the different pieces already kind of together.
Which is its own challenge, but yeah.
Yes, well, I don't disagree.
I want to say, so I know there's a curse word on the screen right now. This is the phrase from Anne Lamott. I've heard apparently some high school teachers paraphrase it as like crappy first draft. So that's what I'm going to say out loud. But in her written piece, it is the S word. This is essentially the idea that you're just write something because words on the page are better than nothing, and try not to edit as you go for the first round, and instead get the ideas out there in their messy, unfinished form, just so you have something to be working with, to get past that like mocking cursor being like, why aren't you writing anything, right? We've all been there. And then once you have that brain dump on the page, then you get to go in and figure out how to make it connect.
Mm-hmm. So. Yeah, and I think that this also ties back to things we said last week about seeing writing as a process, or actually giving yourself a little bit of time. Because if you try to sit down the night before, this blinking cursor is going to be very hard to sort of face, because you know that you don't have time to revise, you don't have time to rethink things or really contemplate. It's just get it, whatever it is down, turn it in, and hope for the best. Whereas if you're able to do it even 1 or 2 nights before, you have at least a little bit of time to be able to work back on it. What was that, Jennifer?
Yeah, there isn't the stress of the impending deadline in addition to the stress of the blank page.
Right.
Yeah, so.
Yeah, and we talked about the outline last time. I think being able to, if it's useful to you, to structure something with maybe a couple of sentences for a thesis, a topic sentence for paragraphs, you can then pull those different bullets out and just develop a paragraph or even a couple of ideas around each of them to flesh out something that works towards a first draft. You can then come back later and say, yeah, I like this, I dislike that, and put together something a little bit more firm.
Yeah, honestly, anything to break up the blank page can sometimes help. In the past, I've grabbed like memes or GIFs. I pronounce it GIFs. You might not agree. It's fine. And just put it on the page, like something that's related, that like I've made some sort of association with it. And I'm like, all right, this will make me smile and also is vaguely related. And now I'm not looking at a blank page anymore. And then I've also got that association to start building from as well. So essentially get something on the page just to kind of help you breathe.
Right.
Is a suggestion, not an ultimatum. Yes. Okay.
And I think the more steps you break this down into, the easier each step becomes.
Yeah. Then you can sorry, and then you can take breaks in between. You can be like, I'm done with writing for today. I'm going to go to my calculus homework or my
history,
public health class homework,
or human biology.
I know about sciences.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I think, giving yourself small goals in general for really any class or any task is good.
Anything.
But it helps in writing too. All right.
Oh, I'll put the acronym in the chat as well.
Mm-hmm.
Smarkle, sorry, keep them.
So, right, with drafting, you're trying to fill in those gaps. You have that outline with those big ideas, those big claims, those big text, and you're trying to fill in the gaps. So how do those ideas fit together? That's your transitions. So transitions might be a couple of words, they might be a sentence, they might just kind of pull 2 ideas into the same sort of context to try and connect, whatever sort of works. Do you have anything to say about transitions?
Don't worry about them till the last round of revision.
Yeah, and I think this is like, drafting 2 once you're several steps down the line. You shouldn't worry about it, I think, before you have many of the pieces in place. We support our claims with evidence, so that's finding things in your text, in your picture, in your video, in whatever sort of material it is that you are analyzing, being able to draw something out. That could be a description of a picture, that could be some lines of dialogue from a scene in a play or a movie, or it could just be a quote from an article. And then we finally have analysis to explain these ideas. So we're taking all of these claims that we're making, we're supporting them with evidence, and then we're explaining that evidence through analysis. Anything else you want to add there?
No.
Okay. Yeah. Right. So once you have started that first draft, we've already talked about, I think, this first bullet quite a bit, but it doesn't really matter too much. you're able to come back to it and think about it more later on. So you're writing it as this process. You can come back and revise as many times as you have the time for and you feel is necessary. And then length is also not important at this stage. So within reason, I think if it's a 5-page essay and you've written a paragraph, that might be a problem. But if it's supposed to be 1,000 words and you're at 800 or 1,200, you have the time later on to work on that. As you're writing, oh yes, go for it.
In stage 2, like definitely get the first draft done, get your ideas on paper, because it's a translation project. And so, but you can't work with words that aren't on the page. And so it's very easy to get tangled up in your thoughts. So we got to get it on the page first. Mm-hmm. In the subsequent revision stages, if your draft is too short, that usually is an indication that you can do more analysis, which we'll talk about in just a second. So it's usually a challenge of moving from summary of the text into analysis, i.e., why does this matter? If it is too long, chances are either we have a couple too many ideas that are not going to fit within this project, and so we'll put those aside for a different project, or it is a case of we are using too many sentences to say the same thing. And so then that would be an opportunity to go back and be like, all right, is every sentence pulling its weight? And if not, then we combine them or cut some. But yeah, the first one, do not care about that. But for subsequent stages, those are the things to look out for.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, essentially with every additional draft, you're caring more and more about these side details that at first you're just trying to get things on the page.
Yeah, but we can't work with stuff that's not there. So we gotta have stuff.
Exactly, right. And so as you're writing these drafts, you're thinking about how you're going to structure your paragraphs. You're trying to pull that thesis across the entire essay. You're trying to make sure that you have this evidence that's showing up, that you're analyzing, that you are connecting together, and that you are then referencing in in-text citations and end of essay citations.
So if you're stuck in the drafting process, this middle column is essentially questions that you can use to push your draft further, to be like, okay, like what am I even doing? Oh, right, I'm trying to use and balance evidence. Let's focus on that for these 20 minutes.
Right. And then after that, you reach the revision stage.
Which is never ending.
Yeah, well, it can go as long as you feel comfortable with.
It is. It's technically never ending, but yeah, and we'll talk. Okay.
All right, so common things that can go wrong when drafting. You might find yourself unable to think of anything. So if you just can't get anything on the page at all, being able to sit down, set a timer for a couple minutes and just write words. They might not all be words that you're going to use in the end, but it will again get you started. And I think that momentum is really important.
Usually you've got 90% unusable stuff, but that 10% is what you can hold on to and start building off of.
Right. And then also that sort of idea of translating it from your head to the page itself can be difficult sometimes, that exactly what your argument is, but you feel like you have to say it in a certain academically acceptable way, or you have to try and follow all of these rules that we've been talking about before, which are not rules, but trying to, exactly, trying to fit it into these norms or these conventions, and that's just hard. Do you want to talk through Otter AI?
Yeah, so I just learned about Otter AI, so I'm very excited about it. Essentially, it is a free online tool that converts your speech to text, and apparently it learns your voice, and so it gets more accurate over time. The person I had learned about it from was saying that at this point, she only has to add in punctuation for it. And so if there's an occasion where you can't or don't want to talk to somebody else to kind of just get your ideas out, but talking through your ideas is really helpful, then thank you, Lisa. Yes, there's the link to it. This sounds like it could be a really awesome tool. So, and it's free.
I mean, the old-fashioned way was to record yourself and then write it out. But yes, there are new technological sort of innovations yeah.
You can still do that, but if it helps your learning to kind of talk it out and then read over it immediately, this could be a good tool. But Also, just finding somebody else, you know, make an appointment with WITS, or find a friend, a classmate, a pet even. Just be like, I'm gonna talk through my ideas. Sometimes it's just so helpful to review what the content is and then start building out what your ideas are. And so often it's a case of like, oh, that's my argument. So yeah.
Yeah, some sort of willing or captive audience who is going to listen is great. And then I've even suggested to students, if you don't have or know anybody that's close by, a mirror is also functional. Yeah.
Yeah. Stuffed
All right.
animal, like whatever
Yeah.
works.
Whatever works. Yeah, and then you might find yourself just trying to be perfect. So yeah, every single sentence you're spending 20, 50 minutes, 2 hours trying to think of, okay, this sentence, is this doing what I wanted to? Is it written right? And so that's something that you really need to save for later on. Trying to get everything out at first is the most important thing. And then if you have the time, you know, if you start 6 months in advance, you can spend a day on a sentence, but you don't have the time for that usually.
No, you can't. But okay, so and I'll talk about this later too. But again, it's one of my hobby horses, as it will, as you. Anyway, so here's the thing. Let's say you spend 20 minutes crafting the perfect sentence. Like, what if then your thinking changes or your argument changes and you need to delete that sentence, right? Like that is 20 minutes that you're not going to get back for this beautiful sentence that no longer has a place in this project. So in terms of effective approaches to writing, we want to go for the ideas first. We want to get, okay, what is the argument? Like, let's get this messy. We can put it in terms of, you know, colloquialisms. We can use slang. We just need to get the ideas on paper. We cannot be editing right off the bat because that sentence, paragraph, etc., might not exist.
And one other problem I can see with that is if you do have a word limit problem, or if you just are trying to revise later and you've spent 20 minutes on a sentence, even if you find, well, it doesn't really do anything for my argument now, given that I've made this change, you might have real trouble trying to delete it because you've become attached to it.
Yeah, like, dude, I have so many problems just like getting rid of sentences I haven't spent that much time on, right? Like, once you get invested in it, it's really hard to, as one of my colleagues puts it, kill your darlings, i.e. take out the bits that don't work for the project. But like, that's one of the things, it's one of the hard parts of writing. But one of the ways that we can manage that extra challenge is by not trying to edit the first time through.
Right.
We'll do that later. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think that sounds good.
Far?
Jada, Miguel,
There's nothing in the chat so far.
Yeah, I will treat that as no questions unless.
Again, please stop us if you're like, hang on, what?
Yeah, or if you just, you know, think I did it this other way, or there was this other thing that we talked about in class. I mean, feel free to share knowledge you have too, because, you know, we'd be glad to listen as much as you know, provide information. All right, so we've talked about introductions, conclusions, sort of connecting in a broad way. So now we're going to spend a little bit more time focusing on how exactly it is that you can build those body paragraphs to include that evidence, include that analysis, use those transitions maybe later on to connect different paragraphs, and all based off of that topic sentence you created from the outline. So you see the hamburger as a representation.
The sandwich, it could be a black bean burger or a tofu sandwich.
Or you could have a veggie hamburger.
Yeah, black bean.
Or an impossible burger.
Sure. Yeah. Oh, yeah. Those are really good. If you haven't tried that yet, highly recommend. Anyway, I know we've been saying like let your ideas structure it. We're going over the conventions of a paragraph here because chances are this is what your audience is going to expect. Again, the conventions can differ by field. Like in philosophy, you don't really have a conclusion sentence. You're building an argument as you go along, for example. So it's kind of its own genre. But this is also a really great way to get out of writer's block because you're like, all right, let me start fitting the pieces into this convention and see where it gets me. And you can kind of play within it, especially as you go along in your writing career. But this is it's a good starting point.
Yeah. I mean, and you can essentially just say, what's next, and at least write that first draft and then come back and say, oh gosh, I hate that structure. And, if you feel comfortable with that, do what you want, but this is at least a good starting place.
Yeah. You can repeat the evidence analysis combo. I would recommend doing that once per paper, if that, just because in terms of clarity of writing, we're aiming for one idea per paragraph, and often evidence brings in another idea. So.
All right, so we're going to break this sandwich, as you say, up a little bit further. So starting out with that topic sentence, we talked about it, I think, a little bit with the outlining. You have two main functions. You have the key idea of the paragraph, and you're connecting back to the thesis. So the thesis was making up this broad claim that maybe referenced in passing X, Y, and Z, or X and Y, these different ideas. So this topic sentence is then saying, hey, remember X and Y or X, Y, Z? Here's how I'm connecting back to that.
So often with the 5-paragraph format, it's taking up in turn each of the 3-part things. So it's like, oh yes, the first way cupcakes are delicious is this. You can still use that, and again, it's not that it's not that the 5-paragraph essay is bad. It's that we don't want it to limit your ideas. Mm-hmm. And so as long as we're thinking about ideas first, sure, we can do that.
Yeah, and
often it'll be something more like, the one way that this text is doing this super cool thing is topic of paragraph. Let's talk about that.
Yeah, I was going to say this fourth bullet too is important because we'd already talked about the outline. So I mean, the topic sentence serves as a part of that outline when you're first preparing things, but also when your reader is in reading through the actual paragraphs, if that topic sentence is not matching up with the evidence and the analysis and everything else in the paragraph, then something's wrong. And if there's no topic sentence at all, then the reader is kind of, essentially they're having a surprise party that they don't want to have, because they have to then get into the body of the paragraph and figure out, all right, what exactly is being said here? How does this connect back to the main argument? And at least in English, that's more work than we typically make our readers do. Other languages do other things.
English the language, not the discipline.
Yes, English the language.
I mean, also the discipline, but in especially American academic conventions.
Yes.
In the English language. We'll go with that. Yay, conventions. All right.
All right, so then you've got this, the healthy bit of the sandwich, if you like, is the evidence that's pulling something from someone else. So this could be a quotation, it could be a paraphrase. You don't necessarily have to use the exact words, but if you do, you have to put it in quotes. Either way, you want to be then using an in-text citation so that a reader can go back and say, they had mentioned something about, the way that cupcakes are very sweet. I don't believe that. Who said that? And they can then say, oh, okay, so Smith, 2013, did a study on cupcakes versus apples and found that they're much sweeter. And they can then go on their own way if they want and look things up.
You and your APA, Smith 2013.
Well, yes, those are differences. But the point being that Smith at least would be mentioned, that the author would be mentioned so you could find out who it is.
Right.
And then you can also use this tag, as it says here. Smith says, apples are so much healthier than cupcakes. Citation, page 27.
Yeah. So yeah, essentially and we'll talk about this later when we talk about citation, but if it's not your idea, you do want to put a citation, but you don't have to put quotes if it's your own words. If it's a really dense quote, like, I don't know, like sucrose is constitutive of chemical names, like maybe then you provide a summary just to help. And because that does two things, that make sure that you and your reader are taking the same thing out of that piece of evidence. And then it's also building your own authority because it's showing that you understand that super dense language and you're able to put it into your own words. So that shows a level of understanding that is very authoritative.
Yeah, because there's that danger that a professor or a general reader might read it and be like, I don't know if this is exactly what this person thinks that it says, or if this is doing exactly the same thing. Maybe I can't quite understand it without the context anyway. So just making it easy on your reader is good.
Yeah.
Right, and so we go from this opinion into this argument, and keep in mind the idea of representative evidence. So you don't need to show every single time that Smith, for example, is referencing how unhealthy cupcakes are, to convince us that cupcakes are unhealthy.
Also, my argument is that what is even health? It's healthy for my soul, Smith, but it's fine. That I would put that in like the next paragraph. We'll talk about the balancing evidence. The opinion to argument is, this is my own definition. It's not necessarily widespread. I say that opinions are arguments that don't necessarily have evidence, which is fine. Like you can, your opinion could be like, the Avengers movie from 2012 is the best movie ever made, right? Because that is going to be based on personal, not objectives, dang it, not goalposts, whatever, we'll go with goalposts. Characteristics, it's going to be difficult to back that up with evidence versus like the Avengers 2012 was broke box office records when it first came out. It's less of an argument like we talked about last week, but still it gets us more into the availability of evidence. And so once we get evidence, then you're showing your audience, hey, look, I'm authoritative. Like you can listen to me. This isn't just something that like a personal belief that I have, which I want to say, like, we're not saying personal beliefs are like bad. Conventionally, we don't include them in academic papers.
Right. Yeah, and you can then take that evidence, like the Avengers broke box office records, to make some sort of claim about how effective that movie was at portraying superheroes or something.
Yeah. Or like perhaps that the questioning, but also reinforcing ideas of vigilante violence.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Stuff. All right. So then the protein of your paragraph sandwich is the analysis. So you've got your topic sentence to explain what the paragraph is about. You've got your evidence to show us what other people have said. And then you've got your analysis to show why that thing that other people said is somehow helping your argument, somehow tying back to your thesis, somehow doing something good for your overall claims.
Yes, this is probably the most important part of the paragraph in terms of analytical writing, which is the vast majority of what you'll be doing in college. So analysis can mean different things in different fields. In terms of writing, this is essentially moving us from the what of the evidence into the how and why this is significant in terms of getting back to the argument. It is bringing in your own ideas, but it is your own ideas based on evidence. And that's where that opinion versus argument distinction can come in, because it is your reading. And like sometimes there can be concerns about like, oh, but it's my own like ideas. Isn't that subjective? I mean, life is subjective, but also again, if you're working based on that evidence, then in some ways it's not super subjective. It's your interpretation of that evidence that you are then using to make your claim. And that is analytical writing in a nutshell.
Exactly. Yeah.
So you want...
Yeah, do you want to mention this about W131?
Oh yeah, so the 1-to-3 ratio was something that came from another one of my writing teachers. So for every like one word, sentence, line on the page, etc., of evidence, you want to be thinking about having 3 of those of analysis. It's a rule of thumb as opposed to like a hard and fast rule. No one's going to really be counting. In 131, this is phrased as 10 on 1, or saying more about less. It's essentially you're picking one thing to be focusing on and you're really expanding out your analysis of it. So analyze more than you summarize, essentially, is the rule of thumb.
So going back to what we mentioned before, you don't want to have 18 examples of Smith saying cupcakes are very sweet and then say one thing about them. Yeah.
But if you're like, hey, Smith says this, and like that's what is influencing my methodology on this study, then we're getting somewhere.
All right, and then this last section, it can be a conclusion, it can be a transition. There are some fields, as Jennifer said before, that maybe don't even have this. But in general, it's nice, especially for English writing, and a lot of times in science writing, to tie everything back together and with a neat sort of bow. So you wrap up that argument, and then you say, all right, here was this argument. some other thing that's connected to this thesis is, and then you introduce through a transition.
I've seen some drafts that do kind of start talking about the next paragraph in that last sentence. And from what I understand, that tends to be something that is introduced or taught in high school. Personally, I like to think of these paragraphs as units or as their own separate sandwiches. And so I would err on the side of essentially flipping the order of the topic sentence. And so essentially it's like, okay, again, in case you got distracted by a butterfly, here's the topic of the paragraph and here's how it connects to the thesis, as opposed to being like, and next we're going to talk about how sucrose functions with the liver.
Right. Yeah, no, so it definitely does not need to be a sort of coming next, although you can sort of suggest that here is this full topic, wrap up this paragraph as a unit, and then move into that next transition in the topic sentence of the following paragraph.
Yeah, but as always, it depends.
Mm-hmm.
So default to the instructions given.
All right, so you know, as we've kind of referred to in passing, we've talked a little bit about using evidence, but keeping in mind that you also want to balance your viewpoints. I think Jennifer made a comment about health as a sort of way to, if Smith were to say cupcakes are unhealthy, trying to maybe problematize what does the word healthy mean, and maybe if there's some other evidence out there that says that you should get at least one thing that you enjoy eating every day for your mental health, well, maybe that's different from sort of physical health, but are these not both a type of health? You know, you could make that sort of argument.
Yeah, and so sometimes an assignment sheet will explicitly ask for a counter argument. Sometimes an instructor might say, like, consider an alternative point of view. Essentially, okay. So there are some what are called like fallacies with writing, which are just things you want to avoid. One of them is called the straw man fallacy, which is like you set up a puppet version of the opposition, then you knock it down, and it's super easy because you didn't actually give the other side its due consideration. So it would be like basically like kind of what I've been doing with Smith, I guess. Something that's just like really easy to knock down. We want to avoid that. We want to be trying to really consider, okay, so like what would someone arguing against my point of view be thinking about? What kind of evidence would they be using? Like, that is legit. How would I respond to this legitimate criticism of what I'm bringing up? Maybe I'm advocating for, like one cupcake per day. And then a counter argument could be like, well, what about the rising cases of diabetes or the risk of developing type 2 diabetes later in life? We are getting to the limits of my science knowledge. So whenever you would like to chime in.
Well, yeah, I mean, so you can,
like, this is not my field.
I mean, it's not mine either. Hello?
Or Matthew froze. One of the two.
Oh, I seem to have frozen. No.
Ah, yes.
Hello?
Hello. Okay, did I freeze or did you freeze?
I'm not 100% sure.
Okay.
We both seem to have frozen to each other. But yeah. So I was going to say that's also not my field specifically. But I mean, I think you can make claims or counterclaims about maybe the cost of wheat, or the decision to use sugars in this way, or the fact that maybe there are other ways to bolster mental health without making a lot of cupcakes, or the amount of time you have. Like, so that there are definitely counterclaims you can make that are valid, that you should consider, rather than just saying, some people might say that we shouldn't make cupcakes, but they are monsters. That's not doing anything useful for your argument, and it's not really taking into consideration maybe the valid claims that this poor Smith author is actually making.
Which then undercuts your own authority as well. And as young scholars, we want to do everything we can to build your authority.
Exactly.
So.
So yeah, as we say here, you know, you're trying to show both sides. You're trying to fairly mix viewpoints. You're not just, you know, sort of cherry picking the things that help your argument and ignoring the other things necessarily. And it does depend a lot on what this assignment is. Early on, you might just be arguing a couple of fixed points, but as you develop as scholars and, you know, in the next couple of years, you will find yourself using more and more other arguments to consider everything.
And this process also works in the brainstorming stages as well, when you're trying to figure out what your argument is and what your position is. Like trying to think about coming at it from all sides, thinking about what are potential other viewpoints on it. Really, really useful.
All right, so I think we are at 3 o'clock, or
Yes.
yeah, 3 o'clock. So I was going to say we will take the 5-minute pause. We'll get back to this, and shortly we will be getting into the draft and doing a little bit of talking about actual examples.
So we will come back at 5 after.
Yep, we'll see you in 5 minutes.
All right, 5 after. Matthew, come back. There we
Hi.
go. Hello.
So I was trying to figure out how to share my screen quickly, and it was not working right, but I can do that. All right.
All right, are we back? Can we see some thumbs up
Thumbs
from the gallery?
From the gallery.
Yeah, reaction button. Yeah, there we
That'll
go.
do
Okay.
it.
Yes, perfect. Okay, thank you. All right.
All right.
Conclusions.
Yes.
Conclusions
So
are so hard, you guys. They're so hard.
I mean, so we've talked about this hourglass, and I think that by the time you reach the conclusion, if you're sort of writing chronologically, like I had said before, you have been working with this text a while. You are familiar with your overall argument, with everything that is kind of coming together, and so to a certain extent, you can just try and let things flow on that first draft and see what your final recap is, and then you might have to go back and adjust your thesis to take it into consideration. You're kind of reversing your introduction the same way you narrowed down to a thesis. You're now broadening out to the so what question, which is hard to do. I mean, you've written 2 or 4 or 8 or 16 or more pages to reach some sort of point. So why should a reader, having read all of that, care? What is the sort of main takeaway? What is the vital connection to them based on this argument? How can you sort of bring this all down into a distilled, important piece of information?
So a few things. One, so the recap is how I think about the first part of this conclusion, just because I think in high school there's a move to say like restate your thesis, and so then that often comes up with I will change 2 to 3 words. I definitely did that, and then call it a day. So recap, I think helps us think about it more as a highlight reel. So again, with that, like essentially think of your reader as highly distractible. Like you just want to walk them through it really, really carefully. And so if they got distracted by a butterfly for the last however many paragraphs, what are the main points that you made to get us here? The so what is the hardest part of writing, but also the most exciting, because this is where you get to really think about like, yeah, why does this matter? Again, we're like Matthew said early on, we're not looking to like hear society. And in fact, I would encourage you not to have a so what that's about society, just because that implies a lot of questions about like, okay, well, like which society, when, who's included in this society? Who's perhaps left out of this society? Why are we even talking about society? And we want to be thinking about broader implications, but still be focused on the topic as much as we can. Some prompts might ask you to talk about society, in which case, ignore that. So again, these are broad strokes, but often it is difficult to make a convincing so what about the entire world based on the work you've done in these 2, 4, 8, etc. pages. There's just not enough room for you to bring in enough evidence. Sometimes it's hard to be like, why do we care? Like the answer is just like, I don't. And so then some of the workarounds that I've suggested are like, all right, well, like, why might my teacher have assigned this? Like, what are they trying to get me to get out of this, and use that as a jumping off point. Or even the hack of, all right, well, I don't care. If I did care, why would I care about this? Doesn't always work, but you can give it a shot.
It's hard, and I think sometimes you'll be writing things, especially early on, that aren't as interesting to you as others, but trying to get that information out there is important. Otherwise, it just doesn't come off as a fully cogent or thought through essay, I think, to not have that final step.
I will also say the best conclusions have like 1 to 2 sentences on the recap and like 4-ish on the so what. It is so tempting to reverse or invert that proportion because it's so much more comfortable to be like, yes, here are all the things I've talked about. If a reader has been paying attention, though, they already know that, and they don't need 4 sentences on that. They need 1 to 2. And then the so what's really where you get to dig in with this, like the significance of why did you even go to all this work besides that you had to for class? Like what does this do or show?
All right, so assuming that you've been following along and writing your essay as we describe each section, you're now up to the revising portion of your masterpiece. So I'm of course just kidding. Writing is a process. We've said that many times today and last week. And I think it is. Yes, we're saying it because it's true, not to spread this conspiracy theory of a thesis through your essay. But essentially there are 3 sort of final steps, and these are not really final in that they're fast, but final in that they are the last couple of steps. Like we said before, you can spend a long time revising or editing or proofreading. Revising is where you're going back, looking at that first draft or 3rd draft or 18th draft and figuring out what's left, what's going right, what's going wrong, how do we push it a step further. Editing is something different. I mean, you can use spell check, and that's technically editing. You can reread yourself closely. Wits will help you with the revising. We're here for the ideas. We'll help you brainstorm. We'll help you sort of put things together. We'll help you talk about a finished draft. But we're not going to help you editing because that's not really what we do. We don't go through grammar and just go step by step every word of your essay and mark it all up with a red pen. It's not terribly useful, and it's not typically what your professor is looking for either. They will keep an eye on grammar. If you're doing everything wrong or everything weird, they might comment. But if you, I think that their first concern is there a thesis? Is there an argument? Are you using sources right? And then the grammar falls near the end. So we don't do that. We will, however, sort of look for patterns at Wits. We can talk to you about, I notice that this happens all over the place. Are you familiar with how, this verb works, or how this comma works, or how you can maybe structure this paragraph in a way that it'll do this thing better or more effectively? And then finally, your proofreading, that's that sort of final step to make sure everything is perfect. You're reading through it before you click the submit button. And that's also something that we don't really do at Wits. So we aren't going to proofread it. We aren't going to edit it. But we will help you revise and look at broader things, because our goal is to try and develop you as a writer rather than give you an A+. Because the grade is not really the goal. It's to make sure that you are developing through that process and working your way through that U-shaped curve.
Yeah, the revising's where you're practicing your toolkit. There's some overlap between editing and proofreading, but that's the nitty-gritty details. And it's nice. It's like the sprinkles on the cupcake. It is. It's a perfectly good cupcake without it. It adds a little pizzazz. I don't know why I'm on cupcakes, but you know what? We're going with it.
It's a nice metaphor. I wish I had a cupcake now.
Welcome.
All right. So talking about revision, you've got this idea of like substantive revision is where big things are moving around. Maybe paragraphs are shifting place. Maybe your evidence is changing around. Maybe your analysis is reforming itself. So these ideas themselves and the way you're organizing and structuring them are shifting. Whereas editing, that's something at a much smaller level of, is this word 100% the rightest, bestest word for the spot? That's maybe a bit subjective, but sure, it sounds good. Also punctuation, like, is this comma in the best possible spot? Well, there are grammar rules, and we can show you some of the books that you could go to if you wanted to read about grammar rules. But for the most part, those are smaller things, and they don't overly affect how your argument is coming across. And keep in mind that, like we said before, you want to be revising first, then editing. If you edit everything after each draft, and then you decide, oh yeah, this whole paragraph doesn't make sense anymore, I need to write a new one, you might have just wasted a lot of time editing something that's not going to stick around.
Which is really discouraging. Yeah, I think there's a move, especially, and like this also applies to peer reviews. So like keeping this in mind for peer review is going to make you super popular in your peer review groups. I'm not guaranteeing that. I'm extrapolating from evidence. But there's a, what? Yeah,
That's
science. See, there you go. Done. I can do it. No. There's I think a reflex to go for like, yes, let's go for the punctuation first, or like this sentence could be a lot clearer. And part of that's because I think it's more comfortable. It's what you're more used to doing. Sometimes it's what's required in peer review in high school if you had that. And it's a lot harder to try to think about holistically, what is your peer trying to argue? How are they going about it? But if you like going for that first is going to be so much more helpful to them. And thinking about peer review as commenting or reviewing as you would like to be commented to. Yes. Same thing, right? Like it's a lot more useful if someone's like, ooh, this doesn't make sense over here, or I think your argument changes, as opposed to you have a comma splice. So again, we want to be thinking about how is the argument being put together. And like if your instructor's like, maybe revise this again, we're not thinking about changing two sentences. We're thinking about really carefully and reflectively walking through the argument and seeing how everything links up. And is every sentence conveying its, or carrying its weight? Is it conveying my meaning? Is it pushing the argument forward?
Right. And how do we do that? I think there are some questions that we can ask ourselves to see, okay, I've got this essay written. I've now spent a lot of time with it, getting it to this stage. So it's hard to take a step back sometimes. So some of these questions might help, seeing, have I ordered this essay in a way that makes sense to someone out there? I in my head, I've figured out that, well, if you follow through the different steps of this text, all of these rooms are mentioned, and they all are associated with different colors. So if I do it based on the rainbow following Roy G. Biv, that makes sense to me. But an outside reader might be like, what's going on? I didn't even notice these colors. I'm lost. So if your mind has this organization structure, being able to write it down and sort of look at it, that's useful. And then being able to do other things to just kind of test to see each step along the way, are these ideas being connected? Is this evidence supporting my argument? That's a really key one. If you pick the wrong piece of evidence and you're talking about it in analysis, and then you realize, oh, that's not even talking about cupcakes, suddenly you might be lost.
Talk about muffins. Oh no.
Muffins. Completely different. Set that aside. And then have you moved from summary to analysis? So not just saying this quote is talking about cupcakes, but rather how this quote is talking about cupcakes, or why it's bringing up cupcakes. Yeah. Anything else you want to add? No? Okay.
Yeah.
All right. So techniques, you can go through the draft and sort of create a reverse outline, especially if you haven't outlined and you've just sort of sat down and written this up over the course of a couple writing sessions. You might not be 100% sure what exactly your argument looks like in the format of an outline. So going through, writing down these main ideas for your topic sentences, and then you are able to visualize, okay, I moved from cupcake sweetness, cupcake health, the height of lemurs, to, whoa, wait a second, where did that come in? And then you're able to see, okay, well, this clearly does not connect up. I must have confused this with my other essay. And you can also, if you had an earlier outline, you can look at the two and say, oh, this shifted. Is this a good thing? Does this make sense based on a way that my thinking changed? Or is this maybe unintentional and I found myself finding a quote that wasn't really connected and then I was analyzing it in a different way and everything went awry? Do I have to shift things? Yeah, how many ideas per paragraph? So not having a bunch of different things happening and making it hard for the reader to tell, how is that topic sentence connecting to all this evidence?
I
And-
tend to write really long paragraphs. I mean, everyone has their writing quirks. That's one of mine. One of my writing teachers was like, if your paragraph is a page or longer, you have too many ideas and you need to break it up. And partially it's a visual thing. Like if you are staring at a page and it is just one block of text, that's really intimidating. And so even visually breaking it up can be really helpful for the reader.
Usually in wit sessions, I like to draw a line sometimes and say, all right, so here's a spot where you stop talking about cupcakes. And then in this paragraph, you mentioned lemurs briefly again. And I don't know why this is, I mean, you know, this paragraph should go somewhere else. And being able to like sort of make boxes and lines.
Yeah, what's the relationship between the chemical composition of sucrose and the way that it builds on itself with yeast to rise in the up? I should have picked something I actually know about, but it's fine.
I mean, that's why I said lemurs. You could just talk about how cute and cuddly they are.
They've got claws, but okay.
Oh, I mean, they're very dangerous too, but that's your counter argument.
Yeah, there you go. And illegal to own as pets. It's fine. Okay.
I was not saying as pets. You took that a step further.
Oh, sorry. I assumed.
Yes. So and so with this essay, you then have this flow that you can see visually of everything is connecting together and following my intro paragraph and my conclusion in a useful way.
I've heard a lot of concerns about like, does my essay flow? I'm not always sure what that means. I think usually it is about the logical connection of ideas. So this is one way to answer that question of like, okay, does my essay flow? Let's reverse outline it and see if it does.
Right. All right. If you wouldn't mind copying over this link, Jennifer, and putting it in the
I already have it up.
Okay. I'm going to bring us here. Oh, yeah, in the chat. I was going to bring us here, though, too. I can switch the share over.
Right? One?
Here it is. Weird that it is not. Oh, I have more windows open. That's why it's not popping up. There you go.
And there's even an anonymous lemur. Oh, so
So we looked at this last time.
Dolores, whatever, same thing.
We're going to look at it here. If you guys want to use the link, you'll be a little bit more free to move around. I will leave it open though, so that those of you who are viewing this asynchronously, or if you don't want to jump over, you can at least look at some of it. And do we have questions for this as well? Were there questions that we wanted them to focus on when looking through the structure?
Oh, I think we wanted to just say, all right, so let's stick with the first one just for funsies. What would be so take a minute to read it over, and then thinking about what we've been talking about, where would you start your revision process? What kinds of things would you be focusing on? And how would you start to change it? What would be your next steps, essentially? So
I've added that to the chat.
So we'll give you, oh, you got it. So we'll give you a few minutes just to read over it and think about it. You can respond in the chat. You can think through it out loud after you've read it over. What are some challenges? How would you address them? Which ones would you address first and why?
And we'll give you guys, I think, what, 5 to 10 minutes to read through?
Yeah.
Okay.
Also, if you want to comment right on the document, go for it.
I don't know if they're allowed to edit, but they might be able to make comments.
Oh, that's me.
Okay, so I just sort of like skimmed through the words, so like I might have missed a few things, but I guess first off, like I would do to like start revising it. I would do one of the things you guys said about like I forget what it was called, but something about like reverse something.
First outlining.
Reverse outline.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and like just like finding basically what each like paragraph, like an introduction and the conclusion are really about, and all of that,
Mhm.
and like
Awesome.
sort of seeing how they would like, well, if they do tie in, or if like say you ramble on a little bit, or if like you talk about something that's not necessarily like that would go with your argument. And I don't know, it was kind of funny. I don't know, I like sort of like whenever I read like papers that are really long, sometimes I just skip to the conclusion. And I found like, I don't know, it was, I forget where it was exactly, but it was
On
like
the
one of the
second
last
page, I
couple
think.
sentences.
Mm-hmm.
It says there are debates happening on wearing a mask and whether we should take down Confederate statues. I don't know, that's sort of like the Confederate statues part like felt out of place. And yeah, I don't know. So I guess like the first like paragraph I would start revising would be the conclusion.
Okay.
But yeah.
So because there was that idea that doesn't seem to fit the rest of it.
Yeah, sort of. Like
Yeah.
the rest is like more or less on topic. Even like the one about like the song that people use in order to like see how long they should wash their hands. But yeah.
Awesome. So I'm hearing from you that there are a few moments in this draft that don't seem to really match the rest of it. The like what song the writer is using, the bit about the Confederate statues at the end. What would you, if this were like a peer review session, what would you recommend your peer do with those sentences?
I would probably recommend them to see how like those statements fit in with their argument and with where they're placed in the like in the essay overall, because
Yeah.
they could, I guess, have like an extra section that like includes all of that, their own opinions and stuff like that.
Is that part of the prompt?
Oh, I don't know.
Not supposed to be a pop quiz, pop review.
Okay, so I guess the song would be kind of like a solution in a way, because like it helps like set in a way a standard for washing hands and all of that.
True. Is that the best piece of evidence?
No. So you would
Yeah.
probably want to find something better, and probably
Yeah.
another one as well.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So we've got in the prompt, it's asking specifically for 2 reputable sources, right?
Mhm.
Yeah. Yeah, and then that sentence at the end of taking down Confederate statues. That is another paper. That's a book.
Yeah, and I think that's it's good to hone in on the conclusion, because we talked about it as being like the last place you're at. So clearly this student has sort of focused on some of these ideas, but there's not really much of a so what question. It's just kind of coming into, there are a lot of debates happening. We've got various topics, one of which we haven't discussed in this essay until right now. And then there's
It's a giant topic.
it's a giant, right. It's a giant topic that is just, this is the first and only time it's really mentioned. So that's just a lot to drop on the end of an essay. And we're looking at, if we look at the assignment here, use 2 reputable sources to back up your argument, and you're looking for this sort of solution with several parts to a challenge. So here,
It can have several parts.
Right. So a solution with one or a couple of parts to this challenge in the community. So we are kind of getting that at the very end, that masking is the rule, although I don't necessarily know what this question statement is doing to help support it. The will you follow it or not? You're not necessarily trying to persuade your readers or ask for their input so much as provide these pieces of evidence that maybe mask wearing is extremely useful, and here's why it is a solution or one of several solutions to this challenge.
Yeah, one of my influential writing teachers, I think I mentioned this last week, said, you are here to answer questions, not ask them, which, while blunt, is not wrong. I think one of the challenges of this draft is that we have like 4 questions in 2 pages, something like that. My rule of thumb is you get 1 question per 10 pages. It's like I get it can be it can be so effective as a transitional tool. You're asking your reader to think about it. You are then, using that to go between ideas. But at the end of the day, your reader is reading your paper to get your take on these questions. So 1 per 10 pages. And
it is also a sort of asynchronous context. So you can't actually, if this were to be a article of some sort where you're looking for a poll at the end of it, maybe you could have questions to get people to answer. But for most essays, you don't get your reader's feedback. Java, did you have anything you wanted to add?
No. Oh, I did have a question though.
Sure.
Yes.
When it says like colds, viruses, and infections have killed more people than other people ever have, is that meaning like people killing other people? Like the viruses are killing them more than other people?
An excellent question. Yeah. It seems like that is the implication. But yeah, I think what you're pointing out is this moment of a question of clarity of like, what is this saying and why is it bringing up this point? In terms of of revision versus editing, this sounds like a pop quiz, but I swear it's pop review. Would this question be more towards revision or more towards editing, do you guys think? Either one of you. Or Matthew, I guess. Sorry, the share keeps flickering, which is why the lighting is weird.
Would it be revision or
50-50 shot, right? In what ways would it be revision and in what ways would it be editing?
I guess like editing, maybe like Well, I guess like revision, like to build off of it or something,
Mhm.
and editing to like make it more clear.
Totally. So
Yeah, I think it's good.
if we're, sorry,
Oh,
Matt.
no,
you
no,
go.
no. I was just agreeing. You can go on.
Okay. Yeah, I think so. Definitely, it can definitely be both because this is in the intro paragraph and we haven't even really gotten into the specific answer yet. It seems like it would be more of a question of editing because the sentence does not, like if we took out this sentence, the essay would still make sense, right? And that's one of the like, I guess the tests of like, is this sentence carrying its weight in this draft? Like if we can take it out and it's fine, then perhaps there's an opportunity to take that out and to expand more elsewhere. But I totally agree with you that if this were one of the main parts of the argument, if this were in a body paragraph, then it would be both revision and editing, right? Because in this case, the clarity is interfering with the meaning that this sentence is conveying. And so in that case, it's affecting, it's a matter of language, punctuation, etc., but it is affecting the idea that's being expressed. And so therefore it's a revision.
Yeah.
For sure. But yeah. Also, y'all, we don't need a hook, right? Remember we talked about that from last week. We don't need the question to start us off. Variations on since the dawn of time cause me actual physical pain. We don't need to do that. We can just dive right in with our answer. We usually do not have the word count to do a lengthy introduction. So,
And
yeah.
this as well for our thesis.
Oh yeah, what do we think about? We talked about this last week. Remember,
Yeah.
you guys were like, this isn't a thesis yet. It's got potential, but we've got to actually say what we're talking about, right?
Yeah. And it makes it
Am I
hard
remembering that?
then to really develop body paragraphs if your thesis is kind of unclear, because arguably all of the paragraphs are related to it because it's talking about what is coronavirus. But what is coronavirus is not really an argument that I can agree with, or rather I can support or not support with evidence.
Right.
I mean, it's not something that really has any persuasion. It's kind of facts or opinions.
One of the ways to potentially approach, so essentially with revisions, we've got our first draft. We want to go back to our prompt first and foremost. We want to, and one of the ways to do a reverse outline is to track where in the draft we are answering that prompt. So I'm going to actually ask Java and Miguel, if you will. So we've got the prompt is, in the last paper, you described a challenge facing your community and the factors that underlie that challenge. And so now we're offering a solution moving forward. So where do you see this draft offering a solution and arguing for it? You can take a minute. This is not an immediate answer. Just, yeah, take a minute or two. Look through. Where are we offering a solution? What is the solution? Where are we offering it? I'll type this out.
I think so. One of the solutions is mask.
Huh?
I don't know. Like an argument against it be like it's not 100% protection.
Okay. Yeah. And that could even be like a counter argument, right? Like one of those balancing evidence things.
Mhm.
Totally. So you're looking at the second paragraph, right?
Yes.
Or a second body paragraph, the third overall paragraph. Sorry, I default to like second body paragraph. No, third overall. I can count. Are masks the only solution this draft offers? And is that a problem?
No, it's also offering about, it's also saying that washing one's hands could, like, basically protect you from being, like, infected by the virus and, like, spreading it.
Totally. So we've got a draft that has 2 solutions. What does our prompt ask for? How many solutions?
A single one.
1. Uh-oh. All right, so that's probably where we would want to start with our revisions then, is to be like, uh-oh. All right, let's pick one of these solutions and maybe break it down into different steps. Yeah, so as Matthew is annotating, the first body paragraph then doesn't seem to be responding directly to the prompt. It seems to be more filling out that first part of the prompt, which is which is that we already wrote a paper, we're pretending, on a challenge. So the challenge is definitely coronavirus, and we have a paragraph of background. But also, this paragraph of background seems to be about the virus in general, as opposed to the community. So just like we were talking about last week with the sometimes counterintuitive idea that going more specific actually gives us more places to go, same thing here. We can get more specific with perhaps coronavirus cases in, as Matthew said earlier, March 2020 in Bloomington, perhaps, or in some other community of our choice in a specific time period. And then by getting more specific, that gives us more opportunities to use specific evidence and be more compelling with the way that we're arguing for our solution. And again, we have that question. All right.
Yeah, I think that looks good. And I guess I would ask Jib and Miguel if you have any other questions or comments you want to make about this draft. I think we'll turn back to something else in a moment, but take a moment to just look through it and see if there's anything else you want to comment on that you notice that's strange or that could stand to be looked at in a revision, or any other comments.
Just like the so like the prompt says use at least 2 reputable sources,
Mm-hmm.
and then like I'm pretty sure it like talks twice about like washing your hands and all of that, but its only source is for like face cloths and coverings and all of that.
Absolutely. So we've got this opportunity to more directly address the prompt and say, all right, like we've got this one reputable source from the CDC. But yeah, we definitely would need one for hand washing. But this is also the opportunity to be like, okay, which one are we picking, right? Because if we went straight in, we're like, all right, gonna spend some time finding a reputable source for hand washing, and then we're like, oh crap, I guess I'm just gonna talk about masks. Then then we would have a source for perhaps another project or just our own understanding. But yeah, for sure, we definitely want to be thinking about, okay, where in the prompt, where are we responding to each part of the prompt and going through that bit by bit, for sure, absolutely. Yeah, the my favorite was staying alive by the, yeah, that's not quite a reputable source necessarily.
Not officially.
It's not that you are not reputable, it is that the prompt seems to be asking for a source from perhaps a government agency or reported on by a trusted news outlet.
Yes, and as far as we know, you are not either of those.
Yet.
All right. Japet, do you have anything you wanted to add, or else we'll move on?
No, I'm good.
Okay. Let me switch the share back to, there we go. All right. So we've talked a little bit about revising. We'll talk a very little bit about editing. Like we said, it's not super important. Being clear, having sort of ideas that are clear is what helps you to sound smart and is clear and is useful and effective in an essay. Having sort of the perfect grammar, that's not as important to that.
Again, there are exceptions, but in general.
Yes. And I think especially at this stage, I mean, you're not publishing anything. You're not at a point where you're worrying about 100,000 other people seeing it. So, you know, let's work our way step by step in that direction. As far as techniques to help you edit, reading your draft out loud is very useful because you're going to catch a lot of things as you're reading through, like, oh, there's a comma missing, or oh, that word's missing, or there's too many words there. Like I've said the word "to" 3 times in a row, and that sounds weird. You can also use a text-to-speech converter. I know Microsoft Word has one where it'll essentially read it out loud to you. And you have to, you know, pay attention a little bit more closely just to see, since the weird automatic voice sometimes doesn't make it as obvious, but you can still kind of catch, okay, that wording was really awkward. I didn't understand what that sentence was saying, and I wrote it. And then resources, I will say mine first. We do have some cool pamphlets at WITS that have been written on a bunch of different sort of writing and grammar topics, including run-on sentences and comma usage and various other things. Jennifer has something else to plug?
Yeah, and I put these in the chat as well. Grammar Girl is my go-to. I find the articles are really useful, break things down really well. I get asked a lot about Grammarly. I tend to not be a huge fan, mostly just because it gets things wrong, and it can just be very discouraging, especially with the paid version, if one is paying money and then it's still wrong. So as we'll talk about with citations, I think it's just faster and easier, even if it's a little bit more work to do the research on the grammar yourself and just make it and just keep practicing.
Yeah, I think a lot of those grammar fixer websites are still very young, and they don't have really the sort of thing that you want in an essay to help you develop. Also, you might have these sort of regular errors you're committing that it might be useful to know what they are so you're not doing them in the future.
Yeah, and also, I mean, it messes with your writerly voice, and like, I don't want to hear Grammarly's writerly voice. I want to hear yours. Right. So.
All right. Yep. And so part of editing is going to be looking at your citations and formatting to make sure that all of the MLA, the APA, the Turabian, the Chicago, whatever style you're using, that you are doing the things that they expect. So some of the norms include like 1-inch margins, size 12 font, double spacing. Almost all styles prefer that. There are other things that are more specific though. If you have those questions, at WITS, we can sort of give you some ideas of what to do, but we're most likely going to try and direct you to the Purdue OWL or somewhere that essentially lays out all these rules. Because it's not necessarily, if writing is itself an acquired skill, citations and formatting are just a sort of very prescriptive box filling or box checking list of rules. So these don't really apply to the main part of your essay, but in order to cite things in text, in order to write a references page, there is a very certain layout that each of these different formats expects you to follow.
And it's a way of building your authority to show that, you know, you have read over the conventions, you know how to fulfill them, especially for things like an annotated bibliography. If you're getting the citation wrong, it's the first thing your reader sees. And then they're like, well, why should I listen to them on anything else? But it is more of a checklist type of deal. And I know sciences have their own citation things that are like journal specific. I think you two would probably be using APA most often in your classes, which is probably, it could be a switch. I think a lot of times it's MLA centric in high schools. APA is essentially just another way of citing. It puts the date more centrally because that's more important than the page number. It's the American Psychological Association. I forget what it stands for.
Yep.
I like
and-
Chicago because it has footnotes and they look cool. I hate Chicago Terrain because it's basically Chicago plus APA for no reason. Yes, I have strong feelings on citations. It's fine. Okay. But yeah, so Purdue OWL, they changed the format within the last year or so, and always it takes some time to learn how to navigate it, but it's worth it. Part of the refresh is because they started getting funding from Chegg, so now they have a citation machine at the top. Ignore that. Again, just like with Grammarly, citation generators tend to be wrong 99% of the time, and it's just faster, easier, and more accurate to do it yourself, and then you build authority and learning. You can't really lose. So, but yeah, it stays up to date because these citation methods refresh every few years, and then you get to learn a new one. Hooray! But it's free. So,
yeah, so there are these huge books for APA and MLA that are being published semi-regularly, semi-annually. And so just trying to keep up can sometimes be a little bit difficult, but the changes are never too big. And sources like the Purdue OWL help you to figure out what the newest norms are. All right, so your key takeaways. You have this evidence that is helping support your claims or your ideas, but based on things that other sources have said. So for citations, you're saying that Smith is talking about these cupcakes, and because of Smith's argument, my own argument can take place. I'm basing my argument off of this foundation. And so you want to show who Smith is, where Smith is coming from. That way your reader can find Smith and tell if Smith is reputable, if Smith is being published in a place like a big newspaper, a big academic journal, somewhere that we can say, oh, this is not just a guy with his blog who's creating some things on the sly and publishing them whenever. You typically will include the text name, the author, the page number. You might have the year. You might have various other tidbits, the URL, especially in the references or works cited section. Also, plagiarism is bad. I mean, other than just making it easy for your reader, you can get in trouble at college level if you are caught plagiarizing. So just don't do it. I mean, you don't get penalized for giving proper attribution and using sources. It's just if you try and do it and pretend that it's what you said.
yeah, you don't get a ding for oversighting, but you do for under. So just oversight if you need. Like, no one's going to be like, oh my gosh, you gave me too many citations, right? Like, unless you're citing someone else when it's your idea, and then they're like, I don't know where your argument is. I will say, so we're paraphrasing it as like, Smith says this, but I say this. Usually you do want to be avoiding first person pronouns in academic writing. Just kind of state it as if it were fact, because then the reader knows that it's because they're reading your paper, it's your idea. So it'd be like, citations are important. However, or indeed, citations are very important for a variety of reasons, including but not limited to academic integrity and giving credit where it's due. Creating a community of scholarship that is built on trust and collaboration, as opposed to competition and backstabbing.
Right.
Like that.
Exactly. And you see some examples here of in-text citations for MLA, where you've got Smith and the page number after this sort of quote, or potentially if you're paraphrasing in APA, you could say Smith and the year. But all of that you can find on the Purdue OWL. Making works cited citations, so that's what goes at the end of your paper. Best way, as Jennifer said, is handwriting with the Purdue OWL. I mean, if you want to take the time to go back through and recheck every single citation a citation machine has given you, I guess you can, but at that point it seems to make more sense to just write them yourself. And
especially for like easy bib, it's so easy to like, cause you just put it in, and then it's so like tempting to just click the first one, even if it's not that edition. Again, it's not even just about your instructor being picky. This is about building your authority. And if you're using a faulty or an incorrect citation, that just undercuts your own authority.
As far as formatting of the paper itself goes, there are suggestions for the Purdue OWL of things like double spacing, 1-inch margins for MLA and APA. They differ slightly, but more often than not, especially early on, your professor is going to tell you, be sure to have your header up here with your name and date and class number, or be sure to have the title centered, or whatever it may be.
Yeah.
All right, and we're kind of going back to a couple of familiar topics we mentioned last time. If you are trying to write citations or find sources that you will then be citing, the research assistants in Wells, probably they will have some sort of online format to be able to make appointments, but they're good to help you find the scholarship, look through the databases online at the library, maybe go back into the stack someday when we're back in person, talk to you about what makes a source credible. So is it coming from a journal? Is it peer reviewed? Are there things that are showing that this is a good source? Or is this from someone's blog? Or is this from Wikipedia? Is it somewhere that we can't really determine who the author is, or we can't trust the author? Whereas WITS, we would be glad to talk to you about your evidence, connecting that back to your thesis, working through texts that can develop your thesis in a useful way that contributes to your argument, connecting your sources to your argument, and keep in mind that none of us, as far as research assistants or WITS, are going to have read your text before. We can help you get there, we can talk about your analysis, but you're gonna have to be the one that comes in with that sort of background knowledge of what the text is about, what the argument that you wanna make, or at least the assignment is, and try and connect some of those pieces so that we can help you take another step on that route.
The RAs might also be able to help point you towards specific citation models for the sciences. I think at WITS, we tend to know about Chicago, MLA, and APA, but there are various specialist citations out there that we don't necessarily know about. So.
Right, and if you can't find them on a sort of Google search, or you can't, your professors don't really provide you with much evidence or much sort of information, you can go to the RAs and they might be able to take you another step.
You can also go to office hours. So at any point
Yes.
in the drafting process, including brainstorming, you've got a draft. You can, like, office hours exist to help you essentially. Like, I think there can be an idea that office hours are for struggling students, or for like they mean you're in trouble, or like you're bothering the professor. As a teacher, I love it when students come to office hours, because it really helps me understand where I can be clearer in class. So it helps other students. I get to talk to students one-on-one, which is awesome. We get to look at drafts. We get to clarify things. Like, it's just a really good time. So it can be scary, but office hours are a really, really valuable tool as well. And they also, because it's your instructor, they know exactly the kinds of things they're looking for, and they can give you more specific guidance than either the RAs or WITS can. Because at WITS, we're working off the assignment sheet and what you have, your notes from class, essentially. You are the expert. And then office hours, you and the instructor are both the expert.
And yeah, I'll bring this WITS page up just so that we talked about it last week, so we won't go into too much detail, but one useful thing, and this was mentioned, I think, in the description for this session as well, is that we can help you talk about things that you don't know, that we don't really know that your professor might want as well, help you come up with a sort of list of questions, and then essentially develop something that you can bring to office hours so you're not just adrift and go in there and say, I don't know what to do. But rather you can say, all right, so I went to WITS and we talked about these sorts of things that I don't really know about, I don't really know where to go with. And, can you give me a hand with those?
Right. We came up with this draft of a thesis statement, and I think that it's addressing the prompt, but I wanted to get your take on it, right? Like, that gives you and your professor something concrete to work on so that you're not just kind of sitting there awkwardly.
Right.
For sure. But yeah, so as we talked about last week, all writers, all stages of writing, we are here to help. As with office hours, it is not a sign of struggling. Like, it's, again, my hobby horse, but like, it's a sign of strength that you are taking the initiative and you're saying, like, oh yeah, I could use some extra support on this. I will reach out to people who are there to help me, like in a place that is designed to support me, to help me succeed. Like, yeah, why not? And it's free. Yeah, so we're free. WTS.indiana.edu, quick one-time registration, painless. Shouldn't take more than 2 minutes, and then you have access to the calendar forevermore. No. Yeah, so we're all online for the fall at minimum, probably also for the spring, which means that we're doing Zoom appointments, which means that those close 3 hours ahead of time. 50-minute tutorials. Starting in the fall, you'll see peer tutors on the schedule. So those are for 100 and 200 level classes only. So if you are in a 300 level class, please do not sign up with those tutors. Sign up for one of the ones that say all courses. So those are the grad tutors. Yes, we went over the do's and don'ts last time, but basically, yeah, we're here to help you develop as writers, develop your writerly toolkit as opposed to creating the perfect document, which also doesn't exist. So, right.
Yeah. And so our main takeaways for today, sort of moving past that 5-paragraph essay, as we talked about before, seeing writing as a process, but once you have your thesis, you develop your paragraph, you work back to your thesis, so you connect everything back and develop that thesis further across your essay. You have evidence that you're implementing, you are developing a strong conclusion, bringing everything home, and you're using research as a way to sort of show your credibility as a writer and your authority. So you're using citations from whatever format your field or your professor specifies, showing where your evidence is from, making you accountable to your facts. And then one of the hard things, like we said early on, is putting the pen to the paper. So, or I guess the fingers to the keyboard in this case, often. You have to sort of develop things in some way to get words down. So that could be outlining, that could be previous assignments that are helping, that could be just sitting down and free writing for a while. But writing that first draft and getting it down first, so that then you can come back with your revisions and address the areas where you're like, oh, I know that this paragraph was really rushed, but I wanted to just get it down on paper, and now I can come back and look at that analysis and maybe rewrite something. And then finally, taking that WITS appointment as a chance to talk with us about your writing trajectory. I mean, it's useful to have questions prepared, although you don't have to. And then you can also take things that you talk about with us, or we can even come up with questions together to your professor to maybe take that next step if you have confusions about the class or other things that you just don't know that we don't necessarily know either.
I'm gonna steal the share screen for a second, Matthew.
Go for it.
Because Joanne brought up a really important point. So essentially, once you register, this will be what you see.
Yeah.
We're ending this week. We open back up August 31st, but there's this limit to menu right here. And so this is the list of topics that tutors have indicated that they are comfortable tutoring. And so perhaps, let's see, we're in bio and exercise science. So yeah, so no one on the schedule right now has indicated that they are comfortable tutoring biology, but that's because we have a limited staff for the summer.
If you do cover letters, for example?
Yes.
And scroll down. Oh, no.
Literally everyone.
Yeah, everyone.
Hooray. So yeah, so once we have our more robust staff for the fall, there will be more. But yeah, there's a whole limit to option with that.
Mm-hmm. All right, I'll take that back for the last slide. So to wrap up, we reopened the second week of classes. So I believe that's Monday, August 31st. Come visit us on Zoom. You can make your appointment as we talked about at that link. Be sure to book before the last minute, especially as the mid-semester and end of semester comes around, because everybody else is going to be trying to book last minute as well. So just like with writing, trying to start a little bit early and getting things to a stage where you're ready to talk with us a couple days or a week before the assignments due might be useful. And good luck, everyone, with the start of your first semester.
Now we're just about out of time, but any questions or concerns? Again, on the chat with your voice in this poll everywhere, just still empty.
All right. Not really a question or concern. Just wanted to like show something.
Sure.
I don't know if you can see my screen or not.
And I think we see your face.
Yeah. I wonder if there's a way to flip it. Here we go.
Aw.
Aww. Yay. Thank you. Yes, thank you
Yes,
both
thanks for coming.
so much for coming and participating with all of this.